Welcome back to, no, I'm just kidding. Welcome back to Working Class Customs YouTube channel, and welcome back once again to Stable B. We are here today to talk about sprockets and chains a little bit, but mostly sprockets. Behind us, we got our trusty old 09 Gixxer 750 here. Track bike, still streetable, but track bike. This thing's like pretty stock. That's what's sweet about it, pretty stock bike. So we're trying to make it not so much anymore. My other 08 Gixxer 750 back there kind of left this one looking like it was standing still on the straight last time we were at the track with it. So we're trying to fix that issue. The quickest, easiest, cheapest way to do that is to do a sprocket change. Luckily, I've got a set right here, 525 sprockets. A rear sprocket is 16 tooth, or sorry, a front sprocket that's a 16 tooth, and a rear sprocket is 47. So that's gonna take us down one up front and plus two in the rear, which should make this thing scoot on like a rocket. So let's get into what chain pitch is and what different sprocket sizes give you and what the difference is between all of that. Before we get started, I do want to point out that we were actually just talking about chains and sprockets on Chikimoto Podcast, episode 23. Go ahead and go check that out. We'll have a link up here. There's like two big changes that you'll make if you're changing out chain and sprockets on your motorcycle. One, I suggest that if you haven't looked at your chain in a while, or you haven't ever looked at your chain, head out to your garage, whatever it might be, driveway, wherever you keep your bike, go check on your chain, give her a good clean, good lube, very good for it. Secondly, so we have chain pitch and then we have sprocket sizes. So your chain pitch is the width of the chain, basically. Generally, most sport bikes come stock with a 525 chain pitch. And what a lot of people will do is go down to a 520. What that's gonna do is give you less rotational mass, right? So the engine of the motorcycle has to do less work to get the same output. Therefore, more output for the same amount of work, i.e. the feeling of more horsepower without actually getting more horsepower. So what that kind of looks like, I'll show you guys right here. And then I've also got two chains we can look at. But in this hand, we've got a 525. In this hand, we've got a 520. So if you put those on top of each other or just side by side, I don't know how good that is, how close, we'll get a close up later anyway, but that 520 is gonna be a lot skinnier than the 525. So you're gonna lose a lot of weight that way. As you can see right here, there's a little kind of lip on the side of this one right here. So this is a 520 conversion for specifically a Gixxer 750. Gotta have that little lip because it's so much thinner and it's still gotta fit, have the same clearances when you put it in. So that's chain pitch, right? Less rotational mass, the equivalent of more horsepower, because the bike has to do less work to get the wheel to move and everything else to move. Next up, sprocket sizes. Much like a bicycle, this is how I got this to work in my head for the first time. It's much like a bicycle. If you have a geared bicycle and you pick a big gear in the front and a little gear in the back, it's gonna be really hard to turn the pedals. You're gonna get a lot more turn of the wheel. If you have a little gear in the front and a big gear in the back, it's gonna be really easy to turn the pedals and you get less speed per turn. Equate that to your motorcycle. If you make your front sprocket smaller, your engine is going to spin less for the same spin of the rear wheel. And the same thing in the back, if you make your back sprocket bigger, that'll spin more for less or the same spin in the front from the engine. So a little confusing, I always get mixed up with it, but essentially you go down in the front, up in the rear, motorcycle is going to accelerate more. If you go up in the front or down in the rear, motorcycle is going to have a higher top speed and be at a lower RPM. So a lot of people on thousands or on like daily bikes that they're out on the road with a lot will actually go down a couple in the back or up one in the front to try and get at that lower RPM, so you're not just sitting there at 8,000 RPM on the freeway on your way to work. But at the racetrack, we want more acceleration. And top speed, there's only so many tracks where you might even hit your top speed anyway, so we're gonna go ahead and do a -1 up front and a +2 in the rear on this Gixxer today, so we get some more acceleration out of it. We'll show you a little bit of what that looks like and some like tips and tricks along the way. So here, just another look real quick. We have our 525 chain on the right here. Get straight onto that, and then a 520. So side by side, you can definitely tell this one a lot wider, this one a lot skinnier. And when your chain is that big, if all that mass, that actually does make quite a difference. And then if you're out looking at your motorcycle wondering like, well, I don't even know what gear mine is, a lot of times your sprocket will actually have your teeth number and your pitch right on it. So the other option is to physically count all the teeth. You go out and you take a look at your motorcycle, you can find the teeth number, and then that's a date. Well, that's not a date. Date's back here, 9 of 17. So September 17th there, 16 tooth for the front, 47 tooth in the rear, and a 525 pitch. And this guy, less easy to see. This is really old. We're not putting this one on today, but you look super close. I don't know if I'll be able to get the right camera angle for y'all. There's a 520 right there. That's a number. And then over here, no way the camera picks it up, but that is a 16 right there. So you can go out and check. It should show you, and then you can Google, look at the forums or looking at your owner's manual and know what your original sprocket size was. So before we fully get started, there's like two things we got to talk about. One, yeah, I'm still wearing flip-flops in the shop, changing chains and sprockets and tires. So there's that. And then two, if you're here and you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and click that button. throw a like on the video, and then while you're watching, for anyone that does have experience with chain sprockets, you catch something that maybe I say is a little off or you got more input, I appreciate you guys with that like massive experience that I don't necessarily have. So throw those in the comments so that other listeners and watchers that don't have as much experience can see that also from your perspective. Thank you. All right, so first step here is that we're gonna remove our front sprocket and then our rear, and I'll tell you why in a second. Before we remove our front sprocket, we gotta get our front sprocket cover off, and in order to do that, we gotta take our clutch off, clutch connector, I don't really know, anyway. And same thing with our shift rod. So what I'm gonna do first is come down in here, make myself a mark with my Sharpie, straight across, just so I can easily put that back on, and I'll do the same thing up here with my clutch. It's already a dot on the arm itself, so we'll just put a little mark right there. That's gonna save me some time later. Make sure that when I put everything back on, it goes on nice and easy. All right, next up, gonna remove our gear position indicator. On this bike specifically, it's a 4mm Allen, but just let that hang out of the way for a second. Okay, and then we're gonna remove all these bolts on our front sprocket cover, and that'll show us our front sprocket. Now we can pull this front sprocket cover off. There you have the front sprocket. So if you're anything like me, you really like taking stuff apart. If you haven't realized it yet, that can sometimes cost you more time than you need to spend. So what I'm doing right now is zip tying the sprocket cover up out of my way, because then I don't have to disconnect my clutch cable at all. I can just leave it up here. It's gonna be perfectly fine. And then I don't have to worry about that being tightened, loosened, anything. It's gonna go right back on a lot easier that way. I'll get this spider web off of here. And that out of there. So you might be asking yourself why we're doing the front first. Maybe not, but I'm gonna tell you anyway. Right now, this is spinning, and it's spinning that, which means that if I can stop this, i.e. my rear brake, then I can stop that. And that's gonna allow me to tighten and loosen that front sprocket without having to go against the transmission gear or whatever else you might come up with to get it to go. Just a quick tip, if you're doing a front sprocket change out, keep your rear tire on. If you're doing both, do the front first so you have your rear tire connected so you can put your rear brake on and use that against the force required to take the front sprocket off. Let's go ahead and get the lock nut removed and then the full nut, and then we'll pull that off of there. So if you have a friend, I definitely suggest bringing your friend over, because reaching over the bike like that is not the best way. But I can say from much experience that it does in fact work. So there you have it. All right, so now that we got that front sprocket nut off, the sprocket's still in there and I understand that, we're gonna go ahead and take the rear tire off and out so we can pull the sprocket carrier out, change the sprocket on that, put it back in, put the chain over it, and then we'll do the front.
And then we'll tighten everything up on the front, and we'll put everything back together.
So, let's get after it. Saw that coming. So what you might have just seen there, which I was expecting to happen, I've changed a lot of tires on here, is when you're applying a lot of torque up like this, it's gonna lift the bike up. Well, now it's loose enough that it won't, but usually applying a little bit of force here, or again, if you have a friend with you, that'll help you out a lot. Have them on the front, keeping the bike down. This thing gets torqued to 76 foot-pounds. It's pretty easy to lift the bike up. And pull out our old trusty ball peen. No, I'm just kidding, I wanna do that. Rubber mallet, just a nice little tap. Then we can pull the axle out from the other side. Wheel spacer and our rear sprocket carrier. Make sure you don't forget that these guys fall out all the time. Make sure you have them all in there before you put this guy back on. Let's go get this on the vise and get the other sprocket put on. Now that we have the rear sprocket and its carrier in the vise, specifically the carrier, we'll go ahead and loosen these nuts up, pull them off. That's a 14 mil on this bike specifically, but you might not be working on a Gixxer 750. We understand. If you're not though, you should consider it. because, well, it might be the best bike in the world. I don't know. All right, got all the nuts off, and we have a sprocket. Now, if you look right here, I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but it says 45 tooth right there and 525 pitch. So once again, if you're wondering, you can always just go pull your sprocket, go look at your bike. You don't have to pull the sprocket off to do that. That's the whole point I'm trying to make. Go look at the bike, and it should say right on it. And then, if you don't know if you're gonna keep your bike forever, do your next owner a favor and put it on the outside. Or, you know, if you want to just mess with the system, go ahead and leave it on the inside. But if you leave it on the outside, or put it on the outside specifically, make it a little easier for them to just go check it on their own, and they can know whether or not they want to re-gear it. But if you take my advice in this video and go re-gear your bike, because it'll make a big difference, then they won't want to anyway, because you already did it for them. So we're gonna get these snug down, and then we'll pull out the book for the torque spec, and we'll make sure we throw the right torque on there, because it is a motorcycle and we're gonna take it to a racetrack. So we wanna trust that all of our numbers are the correct numbers, so we don't have anything else to blame if something bad happens on the track. So our handy manual said 44 foot-pounds. So we're gonna go ahead and get this brought up there. If you don't own a torque wrench, well, I'm gonna recommend you go buy a torque wrench, because if you're doing work on a motorcycle that's more than just standard maintenance, but even then, you should probably have a torque wrench. And if you're not doing that and you're not doing torque specs, go ahead and get after it. While we're doing this, much like changing a car tire, we're gonna be doing standard star pattern. So this is 5 bolts, it's pretty easy. Just skip one every time you go to your next bolt, and then go back, restart your star pattern afterward, because once you snug the first 5 down for the first time, sometimes you only see it in the first nut like we did here, but the nuts might be a little loose, you might get a little bit of turn back out of them. All right, and just like that, rear sprocket is done. Got that changed over, so that's a +2 in the rear now. We'll go ahead and get the front pulled out, get the front back on, and then we can put this back in the wheel. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and pull this off. It might be a little interesting because we still have the chain on. Normally, if you're doing a sprocket change out, people would advise you to change the chain at the same time. But I'll tell you why we're not gonna do that. All right, someone in the comments, let me know. I've never seen this before. I've changed a few sprockets out. Is that stock? All right, so for clarification, I just pulled this off the bike. This is what we're putting on. This is a tooth bigger. This is aftermarket. This is stock. So when I say this bike is stock, I mean it was bone stock. So they have some sort of chain carrier on here. The last time I did a sprocket change on the 08 specifically, it already had an aftermarket chain and sprocket on there from before. So what this is gonna do for us, besides the fact that we're going down a tooth, if you look at the holes drilled in the new one, the missing weight due to that extra whatever that is, it's gonna be a lot less weight right there. So do you wanna talk about rotational mass? That's not like a ton, but it's definitely gonna make a difference. We'll get this thrown on and we'll continue down. New front sprocket installed. Let's go get the rear. Go ahead and get this put back in, the rim here, and then we get to put the wheel back on. Love installing these. This is a wheel spacer. It has to go in there. If you're gonna be changing your own tires often and taking your stuff off your bike often, or just doing maintenance, Driven Racing, and I'll put some links down in the description, they make captive wheel spacers. What that means is that much like when you captivate, whatever, think about that, English. We're not here for English. Anyway, what that means is that they're gonna stay in there, right? No matter what. You pull the bike, you pull the tire out, put it back in, put it out, put it in, they're gonna stay in there. These guys don't like to stay in there, and so you can spend anywhere from 5 minutes, if you're really good and really proficient, to like a full hour just trying to get the wheel back up in and everything lined up and get the axle rod through. So go pick yourself up some captive wheel spacers. It'll save you a lot of time, and they're not really that much money. So one thing that I completely forgot about, which is kind of funny because I was here like, man, this should go right back to where it was. Tightness wise, so I was trying to save myself some time, leave my screws exactly where they were. So you just pull the rod out, put it back in, everything's good to go, and it wasn't going in. So I had to loosen it up, put it in, went back to retighten it to the same spot, and then the chain is just like getting tight. Well, when you change your sprocket size, the total, like your chain length size isn't gonna change. Your chain will be the same length, but it's gonna have to cover a bigger or smaller difference. So you may have to loosen or tighten your chain with that. So just keep that in mind. All right, we're gonna go ahead and put our nut back on the front here, and we'll torque that to spec, and we'll put the lock nut in there. As you can see, I'm just rotating the sprocket. Don't ask too many questions here. All right, we're gonna get this front sprocket cover back on, and then I'll tidy up the loose ends after that, and we'll be good to go. I also just noticed they have the shift pattern right here. 1 and 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. In case you forget while you're riding, you can look down real quick and re-remember. But anyway, if you're working on a jigsaw and you're taking your front sprocket cover off, it could be helpful to like label these because they're almost all a different size. Or you can just insert one of America's favorite sayings at the moment. I'll let you figure out what that might be. All right, so that just about sums us up. We got our sprockets changed out. Again, we went down 1 in the front, up 2 in the rear. That's gonna make this thing shoot off like a rocket, so they say. It should give us quite a bit of acceleration, quite a bit of jump. If you're looking at doing this change on your bike, especially if you're on the street, I recommend going like a little bit at a time, especially if you're a little bit of a throttle happy person. Maybe just down 1 up front, maybe just +2 in the rear, maybe just +1 in the rear, whatever you want to do. Each tooth you go in the front will give you more than each tooth in the rear. There's a little bit of a controversy on that. It's either 1 tooth up front for 2 in the rear or 1 tooth up front for 3 in the rear. Well, that's because if you have 16 in the front and 47 in the rear, that's not quite a third of it. That's why there's that controversy. It really depends on what the ratio is. You'll get a bigger change changing the front. You can read into the forums like forever about which one's better and the slight differences between the two and whatever else. Unless you're testing out like every single different option, it's gonna be hard for you to notice the difference between the two. So I'd recommend if you're looking for a change, but you don't want to get a rocket ship going or whatever it might be for your specific bike, just drop a tooth in the front. It's pretty easy. You should be able to do that without changing your chain size or needing to. Like I said though, that will affect your chain size. If you just drop a tooth in the front, smaller overall, so you should have extra at that point. But if you're already kind of near the end of your chain adjustment, I guess is the word for that. If you're at the end of your adjustment ability, then you might have to drop a link out and get a new master link. So just keep that in mind. Again, normally people would recommend if you're changing sprockets, just go ahead and change both and change the chain because they're gonna wear together and those teeth are gonna put grooves in the chain's gonna put grooves in the teeth and all of that. On the racetrack, you're probably gonna end up changing your stuff out for a different setup before you ever wear it out. If you're on the road, then yeah, I'd recommend just going and grabbing all 3. And then real quick to touch back on advantages, if you go 520, you go aluminum rear sprocket, that's gonna save you a lot of weight and that rotational mass is gonna go down. It's gonna give you even more acceleration. So again, if you're on the street and you're going for that small adjustment, you could even just try doing a 520 conversion and an aluminum rear sprocket conversion and start there. The downsides of doing the 520 and the aluminum rear is that they lose their strength and they lose their longevity. So weigh those pros and cons where you want. I'll tell you that I've been running 520 on pretty much everything I own for a while now. Haven't seen massive wear and tear. A lot of that depends also on how well you take care of the bike and how well you take care of your chain. Always lube your chain, do your research, weigh your pros and cons, and go re-gear your bike, and hopefully you found this helpful. Thanks for watching.